Hey, everybody, welcome to Improv FAQ at Length. This is a series of longer conversations about improv topics that have lots of questions surrounding them. I'm James Quesada.
And I'm Bob Wick.
And we have a very special guest with us, our good friend, Jennifer Socia. How's it going, Jenny?
Hello. Yeah, it's going well. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, we were just talking about it, like all things considered, I guess. Yeah. But thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you on as a guest.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And so the topic for the episode is going to be one that you suggested of power dynamics. And you told us a little bit about just the idea of that on stage and off. And if you could, do you want to start us off just by what you had in mind with that topic?
Yeah, sure. I guess lately, meaning the last few years, I think I've been thinking a lot about power dynamics, both on stage and off, like you said. And basically how we, either in scenes or as groups or as theaters or as an overall community, how we approach power dynamics and the responsibility that comes with that, and how those manifest in our performance and the way that we grow into performing and all sorts of stuff. Just like a light, easy breezy topic.
Right.
What I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's you mentioned like I guess what I'm trying to like kind of get details on is like, are you talking about like socially and the like gatekeeper idea of like opportunity and things like that?
Yes, some of that.
Okay.
I think so. The thing that I guess I've been thinking about quite a bit is we say so much that, improv imitates life, right? And that comes out to bear in scenes and everything like that. But is, for example, like a social power dynamic, or somebody who has power in a theater or in a group or whatever, like how does that influence the improv itself that you're seeing? Like, how do we see that on stage, and what does that mean for what we see, and what does that mean for how we play when we are on stage, regardless of like the group that we're in? Things around that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like power or kind of leadership. I mean, correct me if I'm off target for what you're talking about, but like the more in a position of power somebody is, they're going to put a certain type of performance on stage, and that might influence like the style of the theater, and people might play to match that. And then also on the other end of it is that like, well, if you don't really have a lot of power or influence, or you don't get along with people who give opportunity, then you won't see a certain type of improv on stage, and the representation of a certain playing style or voice or whatever will be absent. I mean, am I on the same page or no?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I also think it's interesting to think about, say you're in a show that has been you've been cast in a show at a theater, and you're playing with people who may have been your instructors. How does that influence how you play? Right. How does that influence like how comfortable you are jumping in? Things like that. Like, even as I think people make efforts to bring people up, what does that really mean? How does that look? Just things like that.
Yeah, I think we've all been in that position where we kind of backed off because someone who we perceived had higher status, even not their character in the scene, but just as individuals. Because like you said, like past instructors or owners or whatever are, jumping our scene and like, well, let's listen to what they have to say, because obviously they're the kings of or queens or whatever, the keepers of improv. So my idea couldn't be as good. So you hold back, and that does affect the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also interesting. Like, I know for sure that I have been in positions where I have been on a stage with people that I respect greatly and that I saw a lot when I was coming up. And even if I had like a higher status character in that scene, it's so like clear to me inside at the very least that I'm like going to defer to whatever they say.
Right?
And I've also been on the other side of that, where I have been in a set or doing a scene with somebody who I had taught, and just you can see that someone is deferring to you. And I have also caught myself hopping out like I'm going to run it because I've been improvising for so long, and I wonder how much of that was on the other side of it when I was feeling like I would better like just shut up and go along with whatever. It's like kind of how your ego and your power get wrapped up into what you bring with you on the stage.
That's an interesting concept, because part of the reason why we get on stage in the first place is because I think because of our ego. There's something in us that wants us to like, hey, here I am, I'm gonna make you laugh, and to put that in check is when you become the artist, right? So being aware of that is just a thing in the first place, I think, is the first step.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, the ego side of it definitely is a huge role in like status and like also self-perception in terms of ego, because I feel like some people also are like just kind of throw caution to the wind, and probably there are some people who are less concerned about this that would be like an anomaly to me. But like, I don't know, I just think of like we were talking about Alex Mara recently, and like he's a good friend of mine that's always just been kind of like just 100% confidence all the time. And he and I started improvising together, and I feel like he's probably, I would have to, I can't speak for him obviously, but like I would guess that he feels this sort of stuff in his own way. But I also assume that like with the amount of confidence that he has, that he might be able to overcome it more. So like, I don't know, your self-esteem, your ego, and your like real and perceived status are all like this mixed pot of just complication when you want to just be able to free play.
Yeah. And I mean, I can totally see what you mean about Alex and having a lot of confidence and getting out there. I do, when the first thing that pops up in my mind when I think of that, though, is that like on a society level, like in a world level, he is kind of at like the top of that power pyramid too.
Yeah.
So like it might be a little bit of a different experience in that way.
Totally, yeah.
So I wonder about that. Because I'm certain that, frankly, my whiteness helped me to feel a lot more comfortable moving through and operating in the space of improv when I first started, and probably like continued to. So I wonder if like that's part of like the power dynamic that I've been thinking about too, is like how, I don't know, like is there space for everybody, and like how does that space inform how you move up, or if you even show up again? My brain is really all over the place on this topic.
No, it's interesting. No, I really like this. And I think there is space for everybody, but it's always moving. You know what I'm saying? Like it should be adjusting and readjusting, and questions like these help. Because like when I started, I remember like having a female on the team was unusual. So I would imagine even being a white female at the time would have been difficult. or I don't know how to say this stuff. And it feels stupid for a white guy to say stuff like this, like, well, I would imagine that, like, but how could I ever fucking know? How could I know? But I do like the micro of this, like when we're teaching class, you see maybe there's a group of friends who are comfortable with each other and who may not go out when someone who's not in their clique go out there. I mean, that's a different version of the power, the power dynamic. Like, oh, these poor people go out to eat after and they don't invite Frank. And when Frank gets out there, they don't like to play with him, like, and that's part of the problem too. Like it should be all accepting.
Yeah. I think it's like, it's the question of how to make systemic change, right? Is that like the part of the reason that it's so overwhelming is that there's a cycle and there's a system, and it's like, well, how does any one piece affect the others? And if you want to make change, what does need to change, or like what's the best starting place when it really is like this continuum where all pieces kind of affect each other. And I think that you're right, Bob, that like it is kind of like it's about like finding your people or like seeing representation of anything from like people you get along with to people that look like you, to people that have just your same social or cultural expressions, and that having a lot of one type of thing will make it very comfortable and easy for that to like it's a momentum thing, right? For whatever is already kind of dominant to stay dominant or be more and more dominant, and it's harder to like infiltrate other balances into that. It's a uphill battle for those things to happen.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting, like how that kind of thing like plays into what is rewarded on stage as well. Like what do you see when you start improvising? Like what gets the biggest reaction, which is probably going to feel like the best thing. Like I don't know about the two of you, but I know that when I started watching improv, the people who stood out to me the most were the people who were kind of like the boldest, like the loudest, things like that. And over time, what I came to appreciate were kind of those like quieter players who were like clearly paying attention and like sort of serving the scenes, the sets, the shows, whatever they were in, maybe a little bit more so than folks who might like initially grab your attention just as somebody who is just like observing and enjoying or something like that. And I wonder like how much of that becomes like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like usually in scenes, I think the people who are playing like those bigger characters seem to have the most obvious power in the scene or the most obvious power over an audience or a direction or something
like
like
a
that.
Stage presence. Yeah.
Yeah. Stage presence. Yes. I guess like my view of who had power in a scene or who had stage presence in a scene kind of like evolved the longer that I did this. So like it may like appear that somebody is really like running the show, but there's like some person who's very like kind of quiet on the back line or just like coming in for those like more subtle moments who actually seems to be like steering the ship. I guess I'm going with like boat metaphors now.
No, go for it. I'm following.
They just have more wind in their sails.
Yeah. Who they really anchor the scene when they want to.
Right. So then I think, okay, so follow me here. I'm going to go.
I love this trip.
Yes. So this is like what we're watching, right? As a new improviser, somebody in classes, you're watching this person who might be your teacher, might not be. This person is really kind of having like the loudest stage presence in a scene. Who might you ask to be your coach? Someone like that. That's their style of play. Like, does that power then become greater because they're now coaching a group of people and kind of like shaping their direction. If more people are, if that person who is like the most dominant and seemingly confident is then coaching the most groups or talking about their philosophy the most, does that then give them more perceived power among the community as like those students come up? Like, how does that like perpetuate? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
No, I get that.
Again, that like
Yeah.
cycle.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a couple factors there because not everybody plays that way, but some people who play that way are just going for the instant gratification of a laugh, the audience. Like there's a showmanship to it almost. And when you're first starting, like when you're like a student, that's very appealing because that's what you want, the laugh. You're focused on the laugh. And as you guys know, as you progress, like the laugh is still fun. We all love it, but a great scene is more than just like a couple moments. It becomes like something that's, has a little more depth to it. So we kind of stay away from that. So I can see why at the time, like a student would find the first person more appealing, rather than the second person. I always think of like Penn and Teller, like the loud one, gets all the attention because he's why the quiet guy's doing all the work and underwater the longest and, actually doing the magic is more impressive. But we all focus on the loud guy because he's moving faster, drawing attention.
It's like overt traits versus more subtle ones, or whatever. What's the opposite of overt? Subvert. Some more subvert traits.
Covert.
Yeah.
Introvert.
More covert.
Revert.
Covert traits. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is like, okay, I think it takes, I see what you're saying, especially, I guess I don't have like a argument or like I just think it's a really valuable observation about how the most overt traits are the ones that are going to get the most attention, and how that is kind of like, well, what if those aren't like the most important ones, or like are that leads to a kind of misconception about what is valuable, and so people seek that out, and it kind of there's like this kind of offshoot of what the art needs, and it isn't getting it because people aren't seeing where the value really is at its most, or like less overt things are harder to see the value in, and so they get sought out less. And again, that cycle of just like, well, then those traits get like buried. It is like this weird kind of like art biology and evolution of dominant traits and whatnot.
Art biology. I like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's like part of what's interesting too, is like the other thing that I think about with that is like sometimes I guess like of course not always, but oftentimes I think folks who focus. So if you see somebody who's very skilled and who's a very bold player playing with other people who they're attuned to and paying attention to, it can look like there's sort of steamrolling when maybe that's not the case. So you get somebody who's less skilled and less attuned. They are maybe a few years into their journey of improv.
On their boat.
Yeah, on their boat. They're like a few years into the sea. And so they're almost like kind of parroting that behavior, but it's in a way that actually makes it a little more difficult to like play with them, or they're like doing that at like the expense of some other things. Then you get like somebody who's like 3 pumps of the oar into the lake. Like it's really gross. And I don't even think that's how you use an oar.
No. Hashtag 3 pumps.
It's so gross. So like then that person sees it and seeks it out and sees that as like a way to play, because maybe a person who is like parroting something that they've seen by somebody with skill is like doing it without that skill, like because there's no governing body that sort of like polices the use of your power in that case. Like then I just wonder, like, what impact does that have? Like who is not even getting up on stage or not even saying anything more than like once or twice because they're like, oh, I see that, I'm never gonna do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That may have gotten lost a little bit, but
No,
it's like
I'm sorry. I'm disagreeing. I totally agree. Because I know I've heard so many stories of like, yeah, I was gonna get up there, but they were all just going ahead, or so I didn't get off the back line. I didn't do this, like gave everybody, not everybody, but a lot of improvisers, because they're artists, have that judge in their head. So if there was a way to fire that guy, or just get people out there. But also, like, I think we don't focus enough on the best improviser is the person that makes the other people look well. But I don't think we celebrate that. I don't think that's something we talk about enough. We talk about the blow line, or who's got the most characters, but we don't talk about like the Phil Hartmans of the world. He's probably was the strongest person on SNL during his era, but during his time, I don't think people really noticed what he was doing until he started playing like Clinton or something.
Yeah, I guess like, and all this is not to like this. Certainly, if you're listening to this, it probably sounds like I'm bagging on people who like play big characters or who are very bold, and that's not my intention. I guess my like question that I'm circling around is like, where is the like where is the responsibility for that power? Like who hones that? Who rewards which behaviors you want to see, and like is what you want to see? Like a lot of people, because we talk a lot about like being unafraid and being bold, and I think that oftentimes when we talk about those things, the people who are more inclined to behave that way naturally, or to have seen in their life like, oh yeah, I can take chances, I can take big risks, I can do these things, like they're likely to feel emboldened by that. And while that is being rewarded, what about all of the other people who have not had that experience, or who have not been receiving those messages over and over again? And like how do
Right.
we balance that, like both as performers on stage, and like each of us has like had some position of authority at a theater, be it from being a director to being a teacher, or just to being somebody who's been around for a long time that people have seen perform. So like I wonder what you two think about, like where does that responsibility lie, and am I totally off base?
No, I think this is a very important topic. Because what I first think about before to answer your actual question is usually when we're doing that be bold speech, is usually directed at someone who's not being bold enough. So we're taking care of the squeaky wheel. But I think it falls on, you're usually talking to a group. So the person that usually takes the charge is someone who's already does not need that note. So you're turning them up to 11 when you're just trying to get the person who was at a 2 to a 5. If that makes sense, knobs. You want to give them to at least a 5 pump before they get to a 10 pump. It's a thing. Anyways, but I mean, now more than ever, I think personal responsibility to actually answer your question. It's a personal responsibility for you to, I don't know, lead by example. And I don't know, when you're having conversations with students, make that part of the subject, like not just celebrate their blow lines and stuff like that, unless that's something they're working on. But like try to, if you're playing with one, make sure you're taking care of them and that you're, I don't know, approachable on stage, I guess. I don't know how to do it other than try to be as open as possible.
Yeah. And I think that taking what you're saying, Jenny, and applying it to like teaching and coaching style is really important. Is to like, I think, and so there's a couple things that that I'm juggling in my head right now, but like, and one of them is that the world of coaching is such a wild west, which is a stupidly extreme title to put on it, because like how much of a wild west can improv really be? But like it's just kind of like, you know what I mean? Just imagine if there were as many like life coaches as there were, or maybe there are. I'm sure like just coaching has more impact on people than I think the structure of how you become a coach, or like who's a coach and like what it means to be a coach would suggest, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
And I think for like a coach or a teacher, like on a personal level, that a really powerful thing that you can do is look to give people guidance and support for what they need as like a person, as much as like what they need, how they need to accomplish any particular style, like and what I mean by that is to kind of be like, well, relative to this person, can I learn enough about them to understand how big of a leap it is to play this way, or to make this move, or to take this note, and if it's uncomfortable to do like a crazy group game, or to play real emotion, that's going to be different from person to person, or play real heady when they don't have confidence in like their intellect or whatever. It's like, find that for that person, and challenge and celebrate their performance based on how they're growing as a person, as much as like whatever the end goal is for the show or the playing style. And I also think that as a theater, it's really important to have like a mission statement, the way that like a nonprofit does, of like what the purpose of the play is, and it at least will kind of give like an elevated thing to kind of point to and think about. And I just think that that's so important. I really respect places that have a really clear mission statement that is both about the art form and what that art form means toward making the world a better place. And again, that's kind of like this lofty thing that we sometimes undervalue as comedians, because it's just improv or whatever. But I think that it really can make such a huge positive or negative impact on people's lives and psyches, to try to grow in this art form, that it's worth having like a mission statement that elevates that idea to an ideal, and then find practical applications for how to put it in your curriculum and reflect it on your stage and whatnot.
If I can piggyback on that just really quick, I think not just having a statement, but also having structure. Because I think about some of the theaters that we've worked at, like I remember being a student, like, how do I get to the main stage? There's no clear path. There's no clear path to getting on this or getting onto a written show. There's no, because sometimes there's auditions and sometimes there isn't. So that leave, so you're sitting there at the bar trying to figure out how to do this thing, and it can get frustrating. And that can lead to coming up with your own perception on how things work, which may or may not be true. I don't know. I think that can be troublesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. James, when you brought up the relative lack of any sort of like governing body, or like I keep saying governing body. I must have heard it earlier. Governing body, everybody.
Well, an admiral for the ship.
Right. Basically, when you were talking about how it really is the Wild West, both to, in some cases, be like a teacher at a theater, or to be a coach, especially, that type of power that you have over people. Like, I think that's one thing about improv that maybe people don't realize unless they're in it. Like, when you start improvising, if you really get into it, you are in a very new and vulnerable state. pretty much. And
Mhm.
what you want is like valid, like there's just a lot that comes with it. It's very emotional for a lot of people. I know that was definitely true for me, and I know that to have been true for many people that I came up with and got to know over the years. So when there are people who have power in those situations, and there's really no control over who that is, save maybe somebody who's running a theater, if they really have the time and ability with like who they are and where they are with things to like really think about the impact that can have, like that's the part that I think about a lot, where I'm just like, man, I don't think oftentimes as people, especially people that get really into improv, especially as you come to it, you're probably seeking something. There's an awful lot of community that comes along with it for lots of people. As you gain power, and I'll speak for myself too, as I gained power at the theater that we were at, like, I don't know if I respected that power or saw it for what it was. And I don't think a lot of people respect and understand that power that they have over other people when somebody walks into your classroom, or when somebody sees you on stage and they're a student and that's like what they aspire to be. Cause we're just like, oh, we're just making stuff up. It's whatever.
Yeah.
And that can really be a very dangerous and sticky thing, because we're all adults. Everybody's coming at things from a different place. There's usually booze involved. I think when you're a student, especially, you don't always realize, I think like you don't even realize the power dynamics that are there. Like I remember having interactions with some of my instructors that when I became an instructor, I went, oh boy, I don't know if that was like a great thing. But as a student, I was like, this is super amazing. We're just two adults that think each other is super funny. This is so cool. And like, it was. And it was like fun. But like also when I became an instructor, I was like, oh, no. And it just sort of like flipped how I saw things. And that got me thinking about the power dynamics of it. That made me think about like, how was I playing on stage? And for like, if I don't know, like, then how did I play based on that? And it's all very fucking complicated.
Yeah, I feel you. And I don't know. There's like all sorts of like I guess what I wrestle with is like, what would be a more ideal kind of like rite of passage, or like certification or whatever, like what is that what's necessary, is like to have like the the improv gods. What did you call it, Jenny? The
governing body.
The overseeing
governing body. Yeah. The godly governing bodies of admirals.
Yeah. The governing body to be handing out like certifications for coaching, to have to like, because that's how a lot of like trades work, is like you get certified for certain types of counseling, or and that's different from like being legally one type of entity from another or whatever. But like, is that what improv needs, or is that like something that we need to be like, yeah, maybe we should have some kind of certification? Or is there a simpler way that we're not seeing, and that's too severe or whatever?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously a certification never really stopped somebody from abusing power.
Right.
Yeah.
You
can see that pretty clearly everywhere you look.
Yes.
But I do wonder if there is room for more intentional conversations and more intentional like rule that maybe rules, but kind of like you were saying, how each theater should have a mission statement. Like I agree with that. And I think maybe like something that could be built in a little more is like talking about like, you have this power, you have this responsibility.
Yeah.
Here's what that looks like. Even if you don't feel like you have power in this room right now because you think that like everybody, like I'm just an improviser, you're just an improviser, like that doesn't how you feel has very little to do with how much power you have in a situation like that. So maybe having some more intention around that overall would be valuable.
Yeah.
And I think that things, certainly since I've started improvising, things have moved in that direction. I think that people are realizing a lot of things and starting to see certain aspects differently. Like I remember early on, I took issue with something that someone did. And like what I was told was like, well, when Second City was here, the auditioners would like comment on like women's tits. And I was like, thank you for that piece of information. Like,
oh yeah, you can't argue with that, Jenny.
Right.
I was like, that sounds like it's true, but I sincerely don't think that now that would be the response. And I think that's because like a lot of people have worked very hard to make people recognize and start to put some balance in like whatever power structures are there. And I think people are being like a lot more intentional about a lot of things, but I don't know if a governing body is the answer for improv. Probably not. I don't actually see how that would be enforced.
It would be difficult because, I mean, we're all adults. All three of us here are dating other improvisers. So how do you make the rule? There's the obvious rules, like don't comment on the bodies of people who are auditioning.
We learned that's no
not good
anymore.
So going back to like personal responsibility, you have to, you mentioned before, Jenny, like when I first became an instructor, I didn't realize or gain power or whatever. I didn't realize that anybody perceived me as someone who had power, because growing up when I was 4 strokes into my boat journey of improv, I had people on such high pedestals. I would never consider myself on a pedestal. Like I think of everybody who was like on main stage at Second City and all that stuff. Like, because when when I was first introduced to improv, I drank the Kool-Aid, so everything was amazing, and I was that student that you were talking about. And yeah, I did have an incident where I made a joke about an audition with the student who was being a little lippy at the bar. And I was just joking, and it really hurt their feelings, and I felt horrible because coming out of my mouth, they thought that it actually meant something, and I realized right there, like that's something I can't play with. I was just trying to be ha, and it wasn't perceived that way. So you gotta be more fucking careful, Wick. And then like I think that's something we shouldn't have to learn in real-time application. We should, as instructors, as people who have perceived power or actual power at the theater, it should be a conversation had.
Yeah. I guess that's a big, that can have a big ripple effect. Is if the theater itself or the circle of leadership is doing a good job, I would hope that would have a ripple effect in similar ways to the negative side effects that you have been talking about, Jenny. I mean, do you think like can positive is it like always this kind of slippery slope of just like things getting more and more removed from a copy of a copy is something that people talk a lot about in improv, like coaching generations, is like it gets diluted or kind of like two-dimensional and more shallow, or you get a copy of a style. And then obviously like there's the bad apple thing of like, how do you have like a perfect airtight organization that doesn't have it, just like surely by numbers, it's going to like happen. So like, do you think that having a positive core is to an organization can have the same kind of ripple effect that negative core can have.
Yeah, of course. Like I understand that so my brain, I go to like problems that need to be solved and like how do those problems turn into other problems? Like let's look how this I don't know. I just look for, I think my brain trying to like protect against things and like look for fixes and look for concerns, I go to that. But I definitely think that this is not all a slippery slope into like shit world. Like it's I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't think that like there are ways that people grow and change, and that as like organizations and communities we can grow and change. And yeah, absolutely. I think it's, first of all, it's really, really hard to step out of something that's like a deeply entrenched pattern. And that can be at a theater, that can be as like a community in general. I think that like, obviously there have been lots of scenes that have had like reckonings or whatever, or like a lot of information that like comes out and everybody's like, oh yeah, this happened to me. That has happened so many times. And I think that it's because like that toxicity like breeds. But I, at the same, like what you're saying, like James, I think that, if theaters do make it a point to educate themselves and their instructors and the people that they're bringing in and putting on stage, to have respect for the power that comes along with that. Like we're really comfortable telling people to wear show clothes. Like that's respecting your position. So like, if we think about this as like a human to human interaction, like, we should be teaching people to respect the power that they have and to use it to, like that kind of, like that power. If you're an instructor at a theater, that theater is lending you power by giving their name and saying, this is a person that we are entrusting to have power. So that power is lent. I think that part of the responsibility that also comes along with power that is lent to you is that you then lend your power to people who otherwise might not have it. That can look like encouragement. That can look like, if you see an opportunity that would be really good for somebody, like helping them find their way to it. I think at theaters that looks like rewarding the behaviors that you want to see more of and being intentional about it. I think that can look like, being intentional about who you do put in power and like keeping an eye on it and having like some standards around it. Because I think that's the thing, like this of course has evolved over time, but like a lot of times it's just like, just don't be terrible. Well, like what does terrible mean? Because I've definitely had some conversations with people, not necessarily improv related, but just world related, where like when I say don't be terrible, what I mean is very different than what somebody else means when they say don't be terrible. So I think like sort of like you were saying, like some clarity, like let's have some standards, let's have some intention, let's have some respect for the role that you might be playing in someone's life as a coach or a teacher, or even like if you're doing a set with somebody that you don't know very well or somebody that you do know very well, like how do you respect that? We've been talking for a while, but open improv jams, that's a whole other can of worms, baby.
Yeah. That's wow.
How do you, and I think those are important, valuable. How do you, as a theater, as like as an individual, as somebody who has run several of them?
Oh my God, Jenny! I mean, you would have a freaking meltdown if you saw some of the jams I've seen in New York. I mean, I
fully believe you.
They're just fight clubs, like with like no context. It's I can't believe it. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I just think like all of this. Improv should be really fun, right? And it should be playful, and it should be like an exploration of all different kinds of emotions and experiences, and you get to play characters and you get to make things with your friends, and you get to connect with people in this really beautiful way. And I think all of that is so great. And I think that with anything that is great and powerful and important, there is a lot of responsibility that comes along with it, because all of that light is going to be reflected, and like there's a dark side to that too. And if we aren't careful about how we're using all of that power, then we end up in situations that are super shitty.
Yeah. Man. You're right. Jams are a whole can of worms.
Oh, man. That's a whole nother episode.
Yeah. Let's talk about jams.
Yeah. I've also seen and been a part of some really great jams in New York, but there are, it was a new level of it in some ways, because it's kind of like, I think for a jam host, it's like this weird hybrid between being a show host and being a workshop instructor, where it should be your responsibility, and is, to set the tone for a safe place, to people who are strangers to you and each other, and to facilitate that as it goes. But like, there are a lot of jam hosts that aren't necessarily teachers or haven't had a lot of experience setting that tone. And yeah.
And there's been people who are performing, no matter how many years you have under your jam host belt, will shake you, because I can't believe you thought it would be okay to say that on a stage in front of people,
Yeah. But that's truly that, like, that first couple weeks of intro one and jam hosting, I think, is some of like the most you really have to be prepared and ready and comfortable. I guess, like, that's another thing with, like, you got to be comfortable enough with yourself and comfortable enough with your position to make sure that it is like as safe and welcoming a place as it should be for the people that are in that room. And like, I know that I for sure didn't really understand or realize that until I started doing it. Like, things that would never occur to me to do, or that like I had seen other people do, that I was just like, whoa, being the person that being like, whoa, oh, I'm in charge of this. It's like, what do I do? Like, that's,
because there's that delicate balance of, sometimes someone's being too much because they're just too much. That's their personality. And sometimes they're just so excited they're doing too much just because they're excited and they don't know what to do with the energy. And you're trying not to side coach too much while you're hosting. But then again, like, you want to protect everybody on the stage. It could be frustrating.
Yeah. What just before we run out of time here, Jenny, what have been some of the things that you've learned that you would advise people who are hosting a jam or in that situation to kind of set a tone or be prepared for? Like, are there specific things that come to mind in that learning curve where you're like, man, I wish I had known this and this earlier?
Yeah, I think one thing that I really wish that I had better internalized before teaching, especially, is that whether or not you regard yourself as being like somebody who is like a super proficient or good improviser, whether or not like you have all the answers, like, if you're seeing something in your class and it feels bad to you, it feels bad to a lot of people in that room.
Yeah.
So call it out. Like, don't be afraid to set boundaries and set a tone before you even start anything in a class. And I think a lot of people do that. And so I think the really important part, and the part that I wish that I had understood better, was that you're asking people to trust you when you set those standards. Where you're showing people if they can trust you is the first time something like that pops up. How do you handle it? So making sure that you know for you what that looks like. And you can't know like everything that's going to pop up you will not be able to predict. Like things will shock you forever for the rest of your life, I think. But I think you can have like a pretty clear conversation with either somebody who is like a more seasoned instructor, the person running the program at the theater that you're at, to say, okay, like if this situation should arise, this is how I think I'd respond to it. What do you think about that? Like, what are your tools for responding to this? Make sure that you feel ready to address those things. And I think like as improvisers, we're probably a little bit better equipped than most people to like roll with the punches of something. But when you are in that different kind of role and something comes up, I think that I wish that I had known how to prepare myself to deal with those things, as opposed to just being like, you can't do that voice because it's racist. Like, well, why? Why? It's like having confidence enough in yourself to say, like, we're not doing that in here, so like let's move on, and not being like, well, it just, and crumbling. Because like you were talking about, Bob, when you don't realize you have that power, it can be really hard when somebody's pushing on it, because they can see that you are not quite sure if you have it. So being prepared for that. I think in the space of a jam, like, I think you should usually, I wish that I had, trying to think, like, I think that you should probably host more than one person, have more than one person up there.
Yes.
And I guess I wish that I had known that, like, you could just cut it short. I wish that I had known that you can just cut it short. Just immediately. Like, it could be the first line in, like, cut it. Don't feel bad for the person who didn't do anything wrong. You can bring them up again. Like, I think I was so like wedded to, this is how the game works. We haven't even gotten to the game yet.
This story has to have an arc.
And it sounds and feels so obvious to me now, but at the time it didn't, you know? And
well, no one's taught how to host. It's like a baton that gets handed to you. You're like, well, I guess I'm doing this now. Where's the list of games? Let's do this.
Yeah.
You know?
I think like I really wish that I had known that it was like okay for me to hold boundaries and space for what I saw as like appropriate. I guess like holding appropriate boundaries is okay. And I think for me a little bit at first, it's like, well, maybe I'm more offended by things than everybody else. Or maybe there were so many times that there were things that I was like, I think that's offensive. I think that's offensive. And others didn't see it that way. And I think that's okay. Like, that's probably a whole other like conversation to have too, where it's like, you know, that, I mean, that's a whole discussion.
But
like,
if the theater says you're the one running the show, it's your show to run. So if it's offensive to you, and I wish someone had said that, I just came up with that right now. I like it. So let's get a time machine, go back, tell you, James, if you want it, I'll tell you as well. It's call scene.
Yeah. And like, that's especially if you're newer, like, and you're edit shy, man. I would have called scene so much. Like, I'm thinking from like what I wish I knew from the perspective of like somebody running a show, but like as like an improviser, fucking call scene.
Yeah.
Like, edit the fuck out of stuff. And like, if you see something that you're like, it's gross.
Yeah.
Edit it. Whether you're in the scene, internally edit. Like, don't be shy about getting yourself out of a fucking shitty situation. Like,
let me get your opinion on this, Jenny. So I've had this situation happen to me a couple of times where there would be a male improviser who likes to, I don't know what the psychology of this is, but like if he's in a scene with you, like you're his, you know, it would make you slutty or like woman shame or I don't know what, like, oh, there's my whore of a wife type guy. And then I call a scene and maybe him and the female performer have a relationship, like, and she sticks up for him. And I'm like, I can't tell you, but yeah, I can tell you. I can tell you that was horrible. And I don't want to see this, but I feel bad as a dude telling a woman that she can't play the horror wife or whatever this guy's but then again, I don't feel bad about it, but I do feel bad in the moment. Like, well, she's telling me it's okay. I know it's not okay. It's weird. It's a paradox. Just not him. He can go fuck off. But her, like, I feel bad.
Well, I think that's really complicated. Because like, I think it completely depends on the relationship that those two people have. I think it completely depends, because like if I was doing a scene with like Mitch, who is my husband, and he did that, I mean, I don't know, would you edit that? Like, you wouldn't do that.
Well, if I knew he was your husband and we've all been friends for 12 years, no. But if I'm hosting a jam and you guys show up independently, and that's the first thing out of Mitch's mouth, which would never be a thing.
What if
I would be like, whoa, and then you might be like, it's cool, he's cute. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess like in that situation, what sticks out to me is like if that's happening and you're like hosting a jam or something, like it's less about like, if you as a host are like, nah, that's like crossing a line, then like, yeah, for sure. And if like you're on a team with somebody and you think it's crossing a line, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, and if the woman on your team is telling you that like that felt okay for her, like, okay, that can be true. And it can also be true that like for you, that was going to a place that felt like it should be edited. Like those things can exist at the same time. Because I mean, I don't think it's like very helpful for like me as a white woman to like tell somebody who is not a white woman, like, well, that's not okay for you because it's not okay for me. But I also think that there's like a level of like trust that you build where like if it's a jam, that level of trust I think is very low. If it's a troupe that's been playing for 10 or 15 years or something like that, you know, the level of trust is probably pretty high there. That's a long time to be performing together. So again, it's like tricky and complicated, and that's why a governing body probably wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Much to my disappointment.
I think us as instructors, or like the peers, should be the governing body, I guess, because when things have come up at the theater that we've all worked at, like I think there were not always, but like you said, it was worse in the beginning. It's getting better and better, and I think we all have a way of. It seems like anytime there's been anybody who was a troublemaker, they, you know, whether it's been inadvertently or directly, have been shown the door. I mean, we could get better. We always can get better. Everything needs to get better all around. But yeah, I think we're stepping in the right direction.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of taking out the bad seeds or whatever that's going on, and I think that that's good. But I also think that the kind of conversation we're having here and the ideas that you are presenting, Jenny, are more about like being a best positive influence, because that because of that ripple effect that the same positive dominance can have, you know. So it's gotta, you do have to work at it from both sides of like kicking out the bad and also stepping up the game to represent what you want. And even in like the jam situation or your example, Bob, is like, well, yeah, if you're hosting at a theater, it's easier to just say, or teaching a class for a theater, if the theater has a strong mission statement, then it's easier to just point to that and be like, hey, it's okay for you, and I'm glad that you have a nice, you know, uncensored relationship, but for house rules, it was, you know, no play zone or whatever. And then if you aren't doing that for a theater, then you have to come up with that for yourself as like a coach, or for a team, you have to have your own mission statement as a team to be like, we are uncensored, no taboo, and that's how we play. So you need to find a coach that is also in agreement with that, and a theater to play with that'll allow it. And And same thing for the coaches. Like whatever your standards are, you have to also respect that. Like if other people are more or less sensitive to subject matter, that you can't force them. It might just not be a good fit. You can only just say that, like, well, based on my experience and philosophy, I'm trying to impart a little bit more a different focus for you guys. Jenny, tell me a little bit, because I really have respect you as a teacher and a coach. Do you have, and I know that you have like a really great reputation with people that you have coached and taught as well. Like, in thinking about all this stuff, if you were to start coaching again tomorrow, pandemic just goes away.
What a dream.
I don't know. Are there things that you would start doing more of, less of, or differently than before?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. I think that, like, for me, just in my mind and personally, I would probably go in more acutely aware of like that power dynamic. Even if the people in the group that I'm coaching are people that like I know on some level, or I've like had as a student before, like I think I would approach that relationship differently than I would, being friends with somebody or having a conversation with them after the show or something like that. In the past, I hadn't always done that. And I think it's because I did not see myself as somebody who had any power in the relationship. I was just kind of there with like other people. Like, why would you want my opinion? I don't know. And I got myself into a lot of trouble that way, because there does come a time, I think, as like a coach or as a teacher, where you are going to have to command control of something or command respect of something just by nature of it. And when you blur those lines, or you don't, that's not to say that you can't be friends with people that you're coaching or teaching, because I think that you can, but like having that distinct boundary, I think, is something that would be a little bit different. And setting that very intentionally at the beginning of that relationship. I think that that's a big thing. I think just in general too, like I think I have more respect for what power and authority means in these situations, having had some time away from it and being a little bit removed, having some time to examine it. And I think that the other thing that I would bring is like lending my power a little bit differently. Maybe, it was always important to me, if I was casting a show or involved in like doing a show, that like there were people in it who had different or less experience and things like that. But I think I would probably be way more intentional about making that space and thinking about what that looks like practically, beyond just saying like, hey, do you want to be like a part in this show? Like, that's one thing. But then like once they're in the room with you, how are you making sure that like you're making sure that person feels comfortable, that person feels like fostered, like they're learning, like they're part of the process, and not just like, oh, like I'm a new person around all these people who have been doing it, so I better like shut up. Like, being more thoughtful about those kinds of things. I think that's what I would bring differently to it.
Yeah, I love that that concept or phrasing of lending power from the theater to the teacher, director, and then to other individuals. And I think that's an awesome thing to just encourage people to do and to think about, is lending power.
And also like fostering. Like I think sometimes when we're putting up shows, we get a little rushed, so if we forget to take care of somebody who may not be as comfortable as we are, because they haven't been doing as long, or may not feel as empowered by the situation as we do. So to make sure, like, take a couple minutes, like, just to have a conversation. It doesn't take much effort. I mean, It does take effort, and you should put in the effort, but when it really comes down to it, it's just a couple minutes.
Totally. Well, this has been such a great conversation, Jenny, and thanks for joining us to talk about it. Before we let you go, you are also a co-host on the show Roach, Koach.
I am, yeah.
Why are you laughing? You named it.
I'm just laughing because that show is us talking about new metal and just like a lot of really dumb jokes. And I'm like, we really need to respect our power. And on that show, I'm just like, I mean, I still agree. And I think that it comes through. And we have done a lot of like tone setting and things like that. But
Right.
it is just like, it's quite a departure from the kind of conversation we had today. And that's why I was laughing.
Oh, that's funny.
We're leaving on a light note. That's fun. Yeah.
It's a really popular show and a really funny one, and also on the Gabber Media Network with Improv FAQ at length. So with that show or anything else that you're doing in the virtual world that you wanted to give a plug for before we let you go?
Just Roach Koach.
Sweet.
All I've been doing other than that is reading. So
Sweet.
if you want to talk about
any good book recommendations before we go?
I am I'm reading a book called Breath, and it's just about the way that we breathe and how that has evolved and how important it is. I'm about halfway through, but so far it seems like don't mouth breathe. Whatever you do, mouth breathing is not
Keep it in your
good.
nose. Got it.
I haven't read the back half. This could completely turn, but right now I'm going on don't mouth breathe.
All right.
Awesome. We'll take the recommendation and put it in the description.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Jenny. Really, really great talking to you. Glad to know you're doing well.
Yeah. Good
Thank
seeing
you very much.
And we'll catch you next time on Improv FAQ at length. Bye.
Bye.